Daniel stayed on the sofa, his jacket damp from the rain, while Sarah sat across from him, clutching her robe tighter as if it could protect her from the flood of memories. Ethan had gone back to his cartoons, but his curious glances reminded Sarah that this was no ordinary evening. The room felt too small for the history between her and Daniel. Every quiet second carried their unspoken past laughter in late-night cafes. Moments when words had almost turned into confessions, and the ache of parting ways without closure. Now here he was again, and she didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. Daniel broke the silence first. "You look stronger," he said gently, though his voice carried hesitation. "Life hasn't been easy, has it?" Sarah let out a faint laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Easy isn't a word I'd use, but I've learned to keep moving. Ethan needs me, and that's enough." Daniel nodded slowly. "I can see that. He's a good kid. Brave too, like you." His words warmed her, but they also unsettled her. She remembered the days when Daniel's approval had meant everything, when his encouragement had given her courage. It frightened her how quickly those feelings threatened to return. She tried to steady herself. "You said you were passing through. What kind of business brings you here?" "Work contracts," he explained. "I wasn't supposed to stop. But, Sarah, when I realized how close I was, I couldn't keep driving. I've carried questions for years, and I couldn't let them sit forever." Her heart skipped. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Questions." "About us," he said simply. The words hung heavy. She swallowed hard, torn between wanting to ask more and wanting to shut it down before it reached dangerous ground. But the silence stretched, and she knew she couldn't avoid it. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Back then, before you got married, I thought there was something between us. I never said it. Maybe I was a coward. But when you told me about your engagement, I walked away because I thought it was best. Still, I always wondered what if I had spoken." Sarah's chest tightened. She had wondered the same countless times, though she had never admitted it even to herself. "Daniel, Her voice faltered, emotions catching in her throat. She didn't want to betray the life she had already lived, even if it was broken now. But she also couldn't deny the truth buried inside her. "You don't have to answer," Daniel said softly, sparing her. "I can see it's not easy for you. I just needed you to know." Her eyes glistened, and she blinked quickly to hide it. For so long she had carried the weight of her divorce, the failure she believed was hers alone. To have Daniel sitting there, reminding her that someone had once loved her enough to wonder all these years. It was both painful and healing. The quiet between them thickened. The only sound was the cartoon voices from the TV and the rain outside pressing against the windows. Ethan laughed at something on the screen, and that sound pulled Sarah back, reminding her of what mattered most. She glanced at her son, then back at Daniel. "You chose silence back then," she said softly, her words steady now. "And I chose a life that didn't last. We can't change that." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "No, but maybe we can choose what comes next." Her heart pounded at the suggestion, simple as it was. She wanted to believe in the possibility, yet fear held her back. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece after the divorce. Letting someone in again of Daniel was terrifying. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come after all these years?" "Because," he said, his voice low and sure, "I realize some things don't fade. They stay inside you, waiting for the right moment. And tonight, seeing you, I knew I couldn't leave without saying it." Sarah's breath caught. His honesty disarmed her, but it also lit a quiet spark inside. She felt warmth where she thought her heart had grown cold. And yet, the fear of opening old doors held her back from stepping forward. Before she could respond, Ethan spoke up again, his innocent voice cutting through the tension. "Mom, is he your friend?" Sarah glanced at Daniel, their eyes meeting across the room. He gave a small smile and answered for her. "Yes, I was her friend a long time ago. Maybe I can be again." The boy nodded and returned to his cartoon, satisfied. But the words hung heavier for Sarah. because she knew Daniel wasn't just talking to her son, he was speaking to her heart. The room grew quiet again. This time, the silence wasn't empty. It carried promise, hesitation, and the weight of everything left unsaid. Sarah looked at Daniel, and in that moment, she understood something. Whatever choice she made tonight could shape the future. Not just for her, but for Ethan, too. She swallowed hard, realizing she stood at a crossroads she had never expected. The past had returned, knocking on her door, and now it was up to her to decide if she was ready to answer fully. And just as she opened her mouth to speak, Ethan turned again and asked the question that would change everything. "Mom, is he staying for dinner?" The question hung in the air like a spark, small but powerful. "Mom, is he staying for dinner?" Sarah felt her chest tighten, unsure if she was ready for the answer, yet a part of her had already known it. She looked at Daniel, whose eyes held a quiet hope, an honesty that stirred something she hadn't felt in years. For a moment, she hesitated, thinking of all the reasons to say no. Life had been predictable and safe since her divorce. She had her routines, her small comforts, and her son, who depended on her. Letting someone back in, especially Daniel, who had once held her heart, was terrifying. But as she looked at him, standing there with the rain still clinging to his coat, she realized how much she had missed this feeling, the possibility of connection, of something more. Yes, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Stay, just for tonight." Daniel's face lit up with a small, relieved smile. "Thank you," he said simply. There was no bravado, no grand gesture, just a quiet gratitude that made her chest ache in a familiar, gentle way. Ethan clapped his hands, delighted. "Yay! Can we have spaghetti?" he asked, already running toward the kitchen. Sarah chuckled, shaking her head at her son's excitement. Even in a moment that felt monumental, life carried on in its small, ordinary joys. Daniel followed her into the kitchen. She noticed how naturally he moved in her home. It was strange and comforting at the same time. They worked together silently to prepare a simple meal: spaghetti, salad, bread, sharing quiet smiles and small gestures. There was no need for words to fill the space. Their presence alone seemed to speak volumes. As they set the table, the tension from earlier began to ease. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Daniel, noticing the way his hair caught the warm light of the kitchen. The way his eyes softened when he looked at Ethan. She felt a pull she hadn't expected. A gentle tug at her heart that reminded her of everything she had once hoped for. They sat down to eat, and Ethan chattered nonstop about his day, his cartoons, and a new game he wanted. Daniel listened patiently, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, and making Ethan feel like he had known him all along. Sarah watched him and felt a warmth spread through her. This was someone who could fit into their life, not as a shadow of the past, but as a possibility for the future. After dinner, they cleared the dishes together. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, and the sound against the windows created a calm rhythm in the house. Sarah felt an unexpected sense of peace, realizing that she had spent years guarding her heart. Yet here it was opening slowly and carefully. For someone who had always cared, Daniel finally spoke, breaking the comfortable silence. "I know I can't change the past," he said quietly, "but I hope I can be part of the future." Sarah paused, considering his words. The idea was both thrilling and frightening. She had learned to protect herself, to guard her heart, and yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "I want that too," she admitted softly, feeling the weight of her honesty. They stood near the kitchen sink, side by side, the distance between them shrinking. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was slow, deliberate, a gentle crossing of boundaries that had once seemed impossible. The air between them held something electric but comforting, a recognition that they could start over. That life sometimes gave second chances when least expected. Ethan's voice called from the living room. "Mom, can we play a game now?" Sarah smiled and nodded, turning to Daniel. He followed, kneeling down to join them on the living room floor. For the first time that evening, they weren't bound by the weight of their past. They were simply two adults and a child sharing a quiet, Ordinary night that felt extraordinary because of the company they kept as the evening progressed. Sarah realized that the doorbell's unexpected ring had been more than an interruption. It had been a turning point. Daniel's presence reminded her that life could still surprise her, that love could return in forms she hadn't anticipated, and that hope didn't belong only to the young yit, belonged to anyone willing to take a chance. When Ethan finally went to bed, exhausted but happy, Sarah and Daniel sat together on the couch, the rain outside casting soft shadows on the walls. The room was quiet except for the occasional sound of water dripping from the eaves. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt completely present. Sarah Miller treasured the quiet of her evenings. Life as a single mother didn't leave her with much space to breathe. So when her son Ethan settled in front of the television, she allowed herself a small, luxurious warm bath. She closed the bathroom door, filled the tub, and sank into the water. The faint scent of lavender filled the air, and for a moment, the world outside faded. Ethan, only 8 years old, was easy to keep happy. He had his cartoons, his blanket, and the little snacks his mother set out for him. The house felt safe, wrapped in the calm of an ordinary night. But then the stillness broke. The doorbell rang. That it was a sound that didn't belong to their quiet routine. A sharp chime that seemed louder than it should have. Sarah opened her eyes wide, her heart skipping. She wasn't expecting anyone, not at this hour. The rain outside had been steady all evening, making the bell's echo feel even stranger, almost urgent. From the living room, Ethan called, "Mom." "Someone's at the door." His voice carried curiosity, not fear, but it made Sarah's pulse quicken. She rose from the bath, quickly grabbing her robe. The warm comfort she'd felt moments ago was replaced by a swirl of questions. Who could it be? Why now? She tied the robe tightly and stepped into the hallway. The soft glow from the living room lit her way as she hurried past the scent of popcorn and the hum of the television. Ethan sat on the couch, looking toward the door with wide eyes, waiting for her to take charge. The bell rang again, a little firmer this time. Whoever was outside wasn't planning to leave right away. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the knob. She hesitated, listening for a voice. A clue, but all she could hear was the rain tapping against the porch. She opened the door slowly, just enough to see Dot, and there he was, Daniel Carter. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. The years that separated them seemed to vanish, and yet the weight of those years sat heavy on her chest. Daniel looked different, older, a little worn, his hair touched with gray butt. His eyes were exactly as she remembered. Warm, steady, carrying stories she had never been allowed to hear. "Sarah," he said softly, almost like a breath, as though her name itself was something fragile. The drizzle had dampened his jacket, and a faint chill carried into the house with him. He wasn't supposed to be here. The last time she had seen him was nearly a decade ago, before her marriage, before her divorce, before her life had become what it was now. She swallowed, her voice unsteady. "Daniel, what? What are you doing here?" His gaze searched hers, and for a second the world felt smaller, like the porch was the only place that existed. "I was passing through," he said quietly. "I couldn't leave without seeing you." Ethan peeked from behind the couch, curious about the stranger at the door. Daniel's eyes flicked to him, and a faint smile softened his face. But his attention quickly returned to Sarah, as if everything he wanted to say could only be said to her. Sarah tightened her grip on the doorframe. She hadn't expected this, not tonight, not ever. The safe rhythm of her evening had been broken in a way she hadn't prepared for. Her heart raced, caught between memories she had buried and the reality standing on her doorstep. The rain fell harder outside, blurring the streetlights. Daniel stood quietly, waiting, his presence both unsettling and strangely comforting. For Sarah, the moment stretched into something heavier than a simple visit. It felt like the past had come back and was asking her to open the door wider, not just to the house, but to her life. And yet she hesitated. The ordinary night had turned extraordinary, and with one ring of the doorbell, Sarah knew nothing would feel the same again. Sarah's hand still rested on the door as Daniel waited in the rain. For a moment, she thought of shutting it, of protecting the little bubble of life she had built for herself and Ethan, but her heart wouldn't let her. Too many questions, too many memories, and too many feelings that had never been spoken pressed at her all at once. She stepped aside. "Come in before you catch a cold." Daniel nodded, grateful, and stepped inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around him. He glanced around, taking in the small but cozy living room. Ethan was curled on the couch, eyeing him with curiosity. Daniel offered him a small smile, then turned his attention back to Sarah. The door closed behind them, shutting out the rain but not the tension. Sarah tightened her robe around her and moved toward the armchair opposite the couch. She sat down, trying to steady her voice. "It's been years, too many," Daniel replied. He remained standing for a moment, unsure if he should sit, unsure if he belonged. Finally, he lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa. Leaving space between himself and Ethan, silence hung in the room, heavy but not empty. It was filled with unspoken words, late nights in college when they had almost confessed their feelings, afternoons when they had laughed too loudly, and the painful moment when life had pulled them in separate directions. Sarah's marriage, his work, and the distance had built a wall neither of them had broken through. "You disappeared," she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, but the weight in her voice was clear. Daniel looked down at his hands. "I thought it was the right thing. You had a future starting, and I didn't want to stand in the way. But I never stopped wondering about you." Her chest tightened. She remembered the day she had told him about her engagement. His smile had seemed forced even then, though she hadn't dared ask why. Now, hearing the truth, a piece of her heart ached with what could have been. She tried to change the subject, but her voice still trembled. "You didn't say where you live now? Why are you here?" "I live in Seattle," he answered. "I was driving through on business. But when I realized how close I was, I couldn't just keep going. I had to see you, even if only for a moment." Ethan leaned forward, curiosity spilling out of him. "Do you know my mom from a long time ago?" Daniel's smile softened. "Yes, we were good friends once." Sarah's breath caught at his words. Once. It was a reminder that their story had never gone further, though the possibility had always been there. She forced a smile for Ethan's sake. "Go finish your show, sweetheart." The boy obeyed, though his eyes lingered on Daniel before he turned back to the screen. Now, with Ethan distracted, Daniel's voice grew more serious. "I heard about your divorce," he said, his gaze steady. "I'm sorry, Sarah. You didn't deserve that." The words cut deep, because they touched on the wound she still carried. She looked away, her throat tight. "Life doesn't always follow the path we expect," she whispered. "I thought marriage meant forever, but it didn't." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You're stronger than you realize. I can see it." Her eyes met his again, and for a moment, everything else faded. The rain outside, the glow of the TV, the quiet hum of the house. All she saw was him, the man who had once known her better than anyone. The man she had almost loved but never had the chance to. The years between them seemed to shrink. She felt both comforted and unsettled by his presence. Comforted because he was here, real, solid, a reminder of the past she had cherished. Unsettled because his return stirred feelings she had long tried to bury. Her voice trembled. "Why now, Daniel? Why after all this time?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening as though the words cost him something. "Because I never stopped thinking about you, and seeing you tonight. It reminded me that some things don't fade. They wait." Sarah's breath caught, her chest rising with the weight of his confession. The room seemed smaller, the distance between them thinner. But before she could respond, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Mom?" he asked innocently. "Is he staying for dinner?" The question hung in the air like a spark. Sarah's cheeks flushed as she turned to look at Daniel. His expression was gentle, but there was something else in his eyes, a quiet hope. "I don't want to intrude," he said softly, "but if you'd like me to stay, I will." Sarah's heart pounded, torn between fear and longing. The boy's innocent question had placed the choice squarely in her hands. She looked at Daniel again, realizing that with one simple yes, she would be stepping into something uncertain yet strangely right. And as the rain tapped harder against the windows, Sarah understood that the past she thought was gone forever had just walked back into her living room, and it wasn't planning to leave so easily.